What happens when a black man, holding a legitimate first-class ticket, is publicly forced to prove he belongs right there, at the gate, under the harsh eyes of strangers? Malik Rivers, a quietly powerful cybersecurity architect, thought his flight to Zurich would be routine. Instead, it became a battlefield of dignity, identity, and bias. Why did the airline staff question his right to sit in a seat he had paid for? What invisible barriers were still standing, even in the sky, where equality should feel absolute? This is not just Malik's story. It's a reflection of the silent struggles faced every day by countless people judged before they are truly seen. It's a journey through humiliation, resilience, and an unexpected alliance that reaches all the way to the CEO's office and beyond. What will it take to change a system designed to exclude? Can a single act of quiet defiance ripple into a revolution of respect and accountability? Stay with us as we unpack this powerful story of courage and transformation, one that challenges the very notion of who deserves to claim space. If you believe in the fight for dignity and justice, like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Don't miss the full journey. The soft whir of the airport terminal at San Diego International was familiar to Malik Rivers. He had passed through it dozens of times this year alone. Each trip a checkpoint in the blur of a life lived at cruising altitude. The windows gleamed under the late afternoon sun, and planes coasted along the tarmac like giant metallic whales. Travelers hustled through security lines, clutched lattes, dragged rolling bags behind them like sleepy shadows. But for Malik, today was different. There was no rush. He moved with the quiet rhythm of someone who had done this dance more times than he could count. He wasn't on vacation. He wasn't here for an escape. He was going to Zurich for work. More specifically, to keynote the Global Cyber Summit, a place where some of the most brilliant minds in tech would gather. And he would be the voice opening the whole event. He carried no briefcase, no entourage, just a slim navy backpack, a leather wallet, and the kind of calm that comes from knowing who you are, even when the world often forgets. Malik stood 6 feet even, his posture relaxed, his dark brown skin smooth under the California light. He wore a well-fitted charcoal gray sweater over a white dress shirt, sleeves slightly rolled. Comfortable, professional, understated. He had never cared for flash. The success he built didn't need a spotlight. He was 39 now, a senior architect for one of the most prominent cybersecurity firms in the country, a man who had built secure infrastructures for 3 Fortune 100 companies. His fingerprints lived in the back end of systems most people used every day without ever knowing. Still, there were moments when all that success felt like a thin shield. He knew that being a black man in first class didn't always mean being treated like he belonged in first class. At Gate A7, the boarding screen flashed, Sierra Skyways 317 to Zurich on time. Malik glanced at the digital boarding pass on his phone. Group 1, Seat 3A, first class. A necessary choice, not a luxury. A long flight like this meant he needed to arrive rested, alert, present. He took a seat near the window, not far from the gate podium. From his pocket, he pulled out a copy of Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. He wasn't rereading it for nostalgia. He read it because it grounded him, because it reminded him of how far he'd come and how far there still was to go. Somewhere behind him, a child was crying. A couple argued in hushed tones over boarding passes. A gate agent announced an early boarding call for families with young children and military personnel. Malik barely heard it all. His mind drifted, replaying a message from his sister just hours earlier. "You better send me a picture of that stage," she had said, her voice all sunshine. "I want to see you shine. Malik." He had smiled at the time. Now, he just breathed, deeply, slowly. Another announcement. Group 1 now boarding. Malik stood, adjusted the strap on his backpack, and approached the priority lane. A few other first-class passengers lined up ahead of him, a white man in a tailored suit with a golf bag slung across one shoulder, an older couple with European accents, a middle-aged woman in a cashmere shawl clutching an iPad. Malik offered a polite nod to the agent at the gate. She didn't return it, just gestured for his phone. He extended it forward. The scanner beeped once. Green. She said nothing, just pointed toward the jet bridge. He nodded again, gently, and walked down the narrow tunnel of metal and carpet, the smell of recirculated air already familiar. The cabin of Sierra Skyways Flight 317 gleamed. It was minimalist, elegant, all brushed steel and cream leather. The hum of air conditioning buzzed beneath a soft piano track playing from overhead speakers. First class wasn't crowded. 8 pods, privacy dividers, lay-flat seats. He found 3A, window, his favorite, sliding his bag into the overhead compartment. Malik felt a soft twinge of anticipation. Not nerves, not quite, but something like it. He would be speaking to thousands in just 2 days. But it wasn't the stage that made his pulse stir. It was everything between now and then. He sank into his seat, exhaled, pulled out his headphones, plugged them into the seat panel, and queued up a Miles Davis playlist. He loved the way jazz traveled in the air, wild, but focused, loose, but purposeful. Just like him, the attendant came by, a tall man in his early 30s, friendly face, asked what he'd like to drink before takeoff. Malik ordered water with lemon. The man nodded and disappeared into the galley. From the corner of his eye, Malik noticed movement. A woman entered the cabin briskly, blonde, mid-50s. She wore the deep blue uniform of a lead flight attendant. Her hair was drawn back into a tight twist, her posture stiff as oak. She scanned the cabin, her eyes pausing as they reached his row. Malik didn't think anything of it, just returned to his book, but something in her stare lingered. She disappeared toward the back. Moments later, he heard murmurs, a slight rustling in the rows behind him, then silence. It passed. The lights dimmed slightly. The last of the overhead bins clicked shut. The flight attendant returned with his water, smiled faintly. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Rivers." He nodded his thanks. The aircraft door sealed. Malik closed his eyes, letting Miles whisper into his ears, Baldwin resting in his lap. The plane backed away from the gate. And in that moment, suspended between takeoff and tension, he felt the familiar calm of a journey beginning. But Malik Rivers had no idea just how much turbulence lay ahead, and not the kind that came from weather. The hum of engines deepened as Sierra Skyways Flight 317 ascended over the Pacific. The tilt of gravity pressed Malik gently into his seat as the city lights of San Diego shrank beneath scattered clouds. The cabin lights dimmed further. A soft blue glow lined the aisles, casting a calm shimmer across the leather seats and reflective trim. Malik sipped from his glass, condensation beating along the rim. Lemon water, simple and cool. The hum of jazz filled his ears. Miles Davis glided over the sharp edge of turbulence with practiced ease, matching the composure Malik kept like a second skin. He adjusted the lumbar support slightly, slipping his book back into the seat pocket. The flight had settled. It felt like one of those rare flights where everything worked exactly as intended. Until it didn't. She came back again. The same blonde woman with the rigid spine and clipped gait. Her badge read Pamela Walsh, printed in clean block letters below a gold pin. Lead cabin attendant. Malik didn't need to read it. He remembered her face. The first glance was enough, a kind of glance that wasn't neutral. It carried temperature, history, expectation. She moved quickly, too quickly, as if urgency justified intrusion. "Excuse me, sir." Her voice had the tone of someone saying "sir" without meaning it. Malik slipped one headphone off, polite as always. "Yes." She didn't smile, didn't blink. "I need to verify your boarding pass." He blinked once, then again. The request wasn't shouted. It wasn't angry. It wasn't violent. But it had sharp edges. A statement disguised as a question. A challenge wrapped in uniform blue. Malik paused, not because he was confused, but because he had been here before. Maybe not here exactly, but in this moment, this precise, subtle narrowing of space, of legitimacy. He reached calmly into the pocket of his seat, pulled out his phone, held it up without shaking. The screen lit up. Digital boarding pass displayed clearly. Flight 317, Sierra Skyways, San Diego to Zurich. Seat 3A, passenger name Malik Rivers. Pamela's eyes scanned the screen. She didn't move. "I'll need to see your physical pass as well," she added. "Sometimes these get spoofed." "We've had incidents recently." "Spoofed." Malik gave the smallest smile. Not because it was funny, but because the irony twisted in his throat. He was the architect behind some of the toughest cybersecurity protections in the Western Hemisphere. And now, midair, he was being accused of faking a QR code. "Is there a problem?" he asked evenly. She stiffened. "It's a security protocol. I ask when things look off." The words fell heavy between them. Off. Malik's eyes narrowed. He handed her the physical printout he had received at check-in, tucked neatly in his book. She took it, examined it longer than necessary, and ran her thumb across the ink as if expecting it to smear. Passengers in rows 2 and 4 were now glancing, trying not to be obvious but failing. Tension, no matter how subtle, carries weight. People feel it before they understand it. Pamela finally handed the pass back. No apology, no acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said curtly and turned. Malik watched her retreat down the aisle. He felt it rise then, that old familiar burn just beneath his ribcage. Not anger exactly, more like the heat of old wounds being prodded, of memories he had never chosen to collect but carried anyway. The first time he was followed in a store at 12 years old. The teacher in high school who assumed he cheated because his test score was too high. The banker who double-checked his ID when he wore jeans but greeted him like royalty in a blazer. He had learned to carry these moments, to buffer them with grace, to diffuse them with data. He was good at it, but that didn't make it easier. He sat back slowly, breath steady, and placed both hands on his knees. A quiet centering, a reset. A flight attendant named Jonah passed by and paused. "Everything okay here?" Jonah asked, voice softer. Malik nodded. "Just had a surprise verification." Jonah frowned. "I see. Let me know if you need anything." Malik smiled faintly. "Thanks." Jonah lingered a second longer, then moved on. 10 minutes passed, then 15, just as Malik was finding rhythm again. Pamela returned. This time, she came with someone else, a man in his 40s, trim beard, tablet in hand, shoulders pulled tight with professionalism. His name tag read Jason Clark, onboard supervisor. Malik took a breath before they even reached him. Jason offered a thin smile. "Mr. Rivers, I just want to clarify a few things, if you don't mind." Malik looked between the two. Your colleague already scanned my boarding pass. Malik replied calmly. Yes, we saw that, Jason said, nodding. But we've had reports of a few inconsistencies with our manifest system recently. It's probably just a tech glitch. We'd like to recheck your credentials with the in-flight tablet. Tech glitch, Malik repeated. And I'm the only passenger you're rechecking. Jason hesitated. Pamela cut in. We need to make sure seating isn't being compromised. You understand. The words sounded official, clean, measured. But Malik heard the silence behind them, the lie they were covering. He looked around the cabin again. No one else was being asked for proof. He turned back to Jason. My name is Malik Rivers. My seat is 3A. I boarded as Group 1. I showed my boarding pass twice. If your system has a glitch, it should affect everyone. Jason glanced down at his tablet. The screen flickered green. The name matched. Everything matched. He hesitated. Well, it seems in order, he mumbled. Pamela's jaw tightened. Then is there still an issue, Malik asked, voice sharp now, edged with something harder than grace. Jason looked unsure. Pamela shifted. There was concern regarding behavior. You seem defensive. Malik stared at her. I was reading a book. I'm just saying, she added. Some passengers get uncomfortable when procedures are resisted. He didn't answer, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't make it worse. He saw it clearly now. This wasn't about verification. This was about permission, about power. Pamela had seen him in seat 3A and decided he didn't belong. She saw his skin, his stillness, and judged it unfamiliar, threatening, even. And now, she was trying to escalate. It would have been easy to explode, to raise his voice, to demand justice, but he knew what that would cost. Instead, Malik leaned back, took another sip of his water. When he looked up, his voice was quiet, but resolute. I'm not moving from this seat. Jason looked like he might say something else, but he didn't. He simply nodded, excused himself, and walked away. Pamela lingered. For a second, she looked like she might protest again, but whatever she saw in Malik's face made her stop. She turned without another word and followed Jason down the aisle. Malik sat alone again. The cabin lights remained dim, but something had changed. The air felt heavier, tighter. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to find his center again. The storm hadn't truly started, but he could hear it circling just outside the cabin walls. The cabin was quiet again, but it was a fragile quiet, like a glass sitting too close to the edge of a counter. One sudden jolt and everything could spill. Malik sat still, arms folded loosely, eyes open. He stared ahead, not at the screen embedded in the seat in front of him, not at the flight menu tucked into the leather pouch beside him. He stared through it all, into the still air, into the weight of what had just happened. He had been questioned twice. His name, his seat, his presence, challenged twice. Once with condescension, then again with protocol. And though the logic in him screamed that it was over, something deeper whispered that it wasn't. Not yet. He could feel it. The way people in high altitudes can feel pressure shift in their ears before turbulence begins. Pamela had left, but the taste of her doubt lingered like bitterness in his mouth. Her words had been dressed in uniforms and policies, but they had no disguise. She didn't believe he belonged. Malik leaned back again, closed his eyes, and pulled in a long breath through his nose. He counted to 4, then let it out through pursed lips a technique he learned in his 20s when coding under pressure started triggering chest pain. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Stillness could be armor. Calm was its own kind of protest. A few minutes passed. The lights flickered to a soft white glow, signaling the beginning of cabin service. Jonah, the friendlier attendant, moved quietly through the aisle with a cart, offering warm towels and menus. When he reached Malik, he paused. "I have a feeling you'd prefer quiet right now," Jonah said gently. Malik opened his eyes and nodded once. Jonah placed the towel gently in front of him, then leaned in. "I don't agree with how that was handled. I just want you to know that—" The words were barely above a whisper, but they meant something. "Thank you," Malik replied, his voice just as soft. Jonah gave a faint nod and moved on. Somewhere behind him, in row 4, Malik heard a faint cough, then a rustle of paper, then silence again. He didn't know it yet, but a woman seated 2 rows back had been watching from the moment Pamela first walked over. Evelyn Brooks, 72 years old, retired school principal, traveling to Zurich to see her granddaughter's violin recital. She had been quiet, as she often was, but her eyes had not missed a thing. She had taught in public schools in Mississippi in the 70s. She had seen this look before, the one Pamela wore when approaching Malik, a look that assumed authority and expected obedience. Evelyn adjusted her glasses and took a small notepad from her handbag. She began writing, her pen scratching in steady, deliberate strokes. If no one else kept track of what was happening, she would. 10 rows behind her, a college student named Theo Hernandez had also noticed the tension. He had filmed it on instinct. He didn't even mean to, at first. He had just pulled out his phone when the second attendant showed up. Something about Malik's composure struck him, the way he didn't raise his voice, the way he didn't fidget, the way he didn't shrink. It reminded Theo of his father, who had once been stopped in front of a grocery store while wearing a suit. Accused of shoplifting, no bag in hand, no item on him. He started recording when he heard the word spoofed, and he didn't stop when Pamela said she felt uncomfortable. He kept filming, quietly, respectfully, but deliberately. Meanwhile, up in row 2, a man in a beige blazer leaned over to his wife. "Do you think he really paid for that seat?" he whispered. His wife frowned. "Of course he did. You saw the attendant? That was ridiculous." He rolled his eyes. "I don't know. You don't usually see people like that up here." She turned her face sharply toward him. People like what he didn't answer. The air was changing. Cabin crew continued with the service, but the mood had shifted. Something had fractured. A divide had formed. Some passengers tried to ignore it. Others leaned into it. Then it came. Pamela returned. Again. But this time, her expression had changed. She looked less formal now, less rehearsed. There was a nervous twitch to her eye, a tension in her jaw. Behind her, Jason followed. "I'm sorry to interrupt again," Jason said, eyes darting around. "But we've had a report that a passenger may be occupying the wrong seat." Malik raised an eyebrow. "You already verified my seat." Pamela stepped forward. "There's some confusion," she said quickly. "Another passenger claims you switched seats during boarding." Malik stared at her. He didn't laugh. He didn't scoff. He just blinked, slowly, and let the silence stretch. "I boarded with Group 1, he said. "I walked straight here. I have not moved." Jason checked his tablet again. Pamela pulled out a printed manifest. "Seat 3A is assigned to Malik Rivers." She read aloud. "But we need to ensure the system hasn't been altered." Malik tilted his head. "You think I hacked the system?" he asked. Pamela shifted uncomfortably. "We're just following procedures." Malik held up both hands, palms open. "You've now questioned me 3 times. You've checked my digital pass, my printed pass, your tablet, your paper manifest, and you're still unsure." He looked around, not pleading, not angry, just asking the room to bear witness. Passengers were watching now, fully engaged. A businessman in 2D cleared his throat. "He's right," the man said. "I saw him board before me. He walked straight to that seat." Pamela blinked. "I'd like to speak with the captain," Malik said, his tone calm but absolute. Jason hesitated. "Sir, that's highly irregular." "What's irregular?" Malik replied. "Is being asked 4 times to prove I'm allowed to sit in the seat I paid for." His voice didn't rise, but the cabin seemed to quiet further, as if the plane itself leaned in to listen. Pamela's voice cracked. "You're making this more difficult than it has to be." "No," Malik replied. "I'm not the one making it difficult." Then came a voice from the back. A woman, strong, clear, elderly. "Let the man be." Evelyn Brooks said, "He's done nothing wrong, and you've made a fool of yourself." Several passengers turned to look at her. "I've been watching the whole time," she continued. "He's been polite, patient, more than I would have been." Pamela flushed deep red. Jason stepped back. "We'll notify the captain," he said quickly. "Please remain in your seat." Malik nodded once. As they walked away, he closed his eyes again. Not because he was tired, but because it hurt. It hurt to be questioned when you had done everything right. It hurt to be seen as suspicious for merely existing. He thought of his mother again. Her voice came to him like a slow echo. "They'll test you in public," she used to say, "but don't let them own your reaction. Your strength is not in how loud you get. It's in how deep you know your worth." He sat still, not knowing that at that exact moment, in seat 1A, the CEO of Sierra Skyways had been watching everything unfold. Vivian Carter lowered her tablet, her lips pressed into a firm line. She didn't speak. Not yet. But the reckoning was coming, and it would come at 35,000 feet. The cabin lights dimmed again, this time to prepare for the first meal service. But the ambiance had changed. There was no longer the soft hum of collective comfort. It had been replaced by tension, a quiet disquiet that clung to the air like humidity before a storm. Malik sat motionless in 3A. His body relaxed, but his mind coiled tight. He had stopped pretending to read. The book remained in his lap, open but untouched. His hands rested gently on the armrests, fingers occasionally tapping in an unconscious rhythm. Not nervousness, readiness, a low pulse of restrained energy. Across the aisle, the businessman in 2D Grant Summers, CFO of a logistics firm, stared at him over the rim of his whiskey glass. It wasn't a hostile stare. It was curious. Grant had never been called out the way Malik had just been. No one had ever triple-checked his seat, even on flights where he upgraded last minute or boarded late, and he knew enough to realize this wasn't normal. Behind Malik, Evelyn Brooks shifted in her seat. She looked over her glasses toward the galley, where Pamela and Jason had disappeared. The page in her lap was blank. Her pen hovered, waiting for more. In the back of the plane, Theo Hernandez sat with his phone hidden under his tray table. He was reviewing the footage. The resolution was clear, and Pamela's voice sharp, doubting, dismissive, cut through even the ambient hum of the engines. He had uploaded a short clip to his private story. Within 5 minutes, it had been shared 14 times. Something was happening. Pamela returned. Her lips were pursed tightly. She walked with forced confidence, like someone putting on a show of control she no longer truly had. Jason trailed her, eyes darting like a man looking for an emergency exit. Between them, they carried a tense silence, and the moment they reached Malik's seat, it fractured. "Mr. Rivers," Pamela began, "we've spoken with the captain. He's authorized us to make a seating reassignment to resolve the situation." Malik turned his head slowly. The movement was quiet, but deliberate. "Seating reassignment?" She nodded. "We're going to move you to business class to de-escalate. It's still premium. You'll have full service and more privacy." Malik blinked once. "De-escalate," Jason added quickly. "This isn't a punishment. It's just that some passengers have expressed concern, and we want everyone to feel comfortable." Malik leaned back slightly, the leather creaking beneath him. His voice was steady. "I paid for this seat. I boarded with Group 1. I showed you my documentation. I've been calm, quiet, respectful." He paused. Let the weight of each word land. "And now, after all that, you're telling me that someone else's discomfort gives you the right to remove me from what I rightfully paid for?" Pamela raised a brow. "This isn't personal. We're just trying to keep the cabin peaceful." Then she added something that shifted the room. "You've made things uncomfortable by being confrontational." That was it. The line. The blade disguised as policy. The accusation so many black men knew too well. The idea that composure was aggression, that asserting truth was a threat. Malik sat still for a long moment. He thought of his niece, who had recently asked him why her teacher always called on her last. He thought of his father, who had once been mistaken for a chauffeur while picking Malik up from a tech conference. And he thought of himself, a man who built complex security frameworks for multinational systems, who handled crises with surgical precision, who had sat in this exact seat dozens of times without ever needing to prove he belonged. Until now. He looked around. Evelyn in 4B caught his eyes. She gave a slight nod, as if passing strength invisibly between them. Grant in 2D cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said loudly enough for several rows to hear. "I saw this man board first. He hasn't moved. He hasn't raised his voice. He hasn't done anything wrong." Jason's expression faltered. "Sir, we appreciate your input, but I'm not done," Grant interrupted. "If you move him, you're making a statement that being calm, prepared, and professional isn't enough if you don't look the part. And that's not just wrong, it's disgusting." A murmur spread across the cabin. Passengers shifted. Some nodded. A few shook their heads in disbelief. Jason looked stunned. Pamela's face had gone pale. Malik turned to her, still composed. "Do you really want to turn this flight into a headline?" She didn't answer. He looked back at Jason. "I will not move. If there's a real safety concern, I'll cooperate with the captain. Otherwise, I suggest you return to your duties and leave me alone." Jason's lips parted, but no words came. Then from the front of the cabin, a new voice entered the scene. A woman's voice, low, calm, commanding. "That won't be necessary." Heads turned from seat 1A. Vivian Carter stood slowly. Her heels clicked softly as she stepped into the aisle. She wore a gray blazer over a navy blouse, and her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a smooth bun. No badge, no announcement, but she didn't need one. Her presence was enough. Pamela's eyes widened. Vivian approached them, her gaze direct, sharp but measured. "I've been observing this entire situation from the beginning," she said, "and what I've seen is unacceptable." Pamela opened her mouth. "Ma'am, I don't believe this concerns you." Vivian held up a hand. "It does. It very much does." She turned to Malik. "Mr. Rivers, may I speak with you privately?" Malik nodded slowly. Vivian gestured to the empty galley space just past the first-class curtain. As they walked, the silence behind them felt louder than any argument. Inside the small space, Vivian turned. "Mr. Rivers, my name is Vivian Carter. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Sierra Skyways." Malik blinked. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but not this. She continued. "I fly unannounced several times a year to observe how our crews operate. I've been watching from the moment you boarded." Malik said nothing, just waited. "What happened to you," she continued, "is not policy. It is not protocol, and it is not acceptable." He studied her, tried to measure her sincerity. Her voice didn't shake. Her eyes didn't dart. Vivian took a breath. "I won't insult you by offering a voucher or a hollow apology, but I will tell you this. Pamela and Jason will be relieved of their duties as soon as we land. And before then, I would like to personally escort you back to your seat." Malik looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Thank you." Vivian nodded in return. Her voice dropped just above a whisper. "You handled this with more dignity than most people would have, myself included." They returned to the cabin together. Vivian led, walking a half step behind Malik as they moved past rows of passengers now watching openly. As they approached 3A, Vivian spoke clearly, for all to hear. "Mr. Rivers will be remaining in his seat. He has conducted himself with complete composure. This matter is resolved." Then she turned to Pamela and Jason. "You're both to report to operations the moment we land." Jason's mouth fell open. Pamela looked like she had been struck. Vivian gave them no further attention. She placed a hand gently on Malik's seat as he settled back in. "If you need anything at all," she said softly, "don't hesitate to ask." Then she returned to 1A without another word, and for the first time since the wheels left San Diego, Malik exhaled without tension in his chest. The turbulence wasn't gone, but now someone else was feeling it too. The engine hum was softer now, tucked behind the thickening quiet of a flight that had just been shaken and reset. Overhead, the seatbelt sign blinked off again, but no one moved. The silence felt deliberate, as if the whole cabin was holding its breath in shared recognition of what had just happened. Malik sat back in 3A, staring out the small round window. On the other side of that reinforced glass was endless dark, interrupted only by faint reflections of wing lights glinting off midnight clouds. It should have been a moment of peace, a moment of satisfaction, but it didn't feel like a win. It felt like something else, a bruise that didn't show but ached when touched, even though Vivian Carter had publicly affirmed his place and her authority. Malik couldn't unclench the quiet part of himself that had curled in on instinct, that deeply rooted part that always asked, "Am I safe now, or just visible?" Pamela had not spoken again. She had disappeared into the rear galley, red-faced and rigid. Jason, equally silent, had sat down in a vacant jump seat as though gravity itself had turned on him. The authority they once wielded like a club now hung limp in their hands. Jonah returned quietly, placing a new bottle of water at Malik's armrest. He didn't say anything, just gave him a respectful nod, one human being recognizing another, then moved on. The gesture meant more than words. Malik turned his attention inward. His mind drifted. The flight's low drone seemed to pulse with memory. He thought of the job interview 12 years ago, when a recruiter suggested he abbreviate his name on the resume. You know, just to make it a little easier for people to say. Maybe Mike. He remembered staring at the man across the table and forcing a smile. My name is Malik. If that's too much, I'm not your guy. Even now, so many years later, that moment still echoed. Names carried history. They carried intention. His parents had chosen Malik because it meant king in Arabic. His mother, a librarian, had read it in a book of poetry. His father, a jazz saxophonist, had whispered it to him for the first time in a hospital room with tears in his eyes. And now here he was, 39,000 feet above the earth, being asked not just to prove his identity, but to justify his right to claim space. Across the aisle, Evelyn Brooks was still awake. She hadn't touched the in-flight meal. Her tray remained closed. Her pen was back in her hand. "You handled that well," she said softly without turning. Malik looked over, surprised by her voice in the quiet. "Thank you," he replied. "I don't know if it made a difference." "Oh, it did," Evelyn answered. "Even if it didn't feel like it." There was a pause. She turned her head to face him now, her eyes steady behind thin glasses. "I was your age when I was told I couldn't attend a university because of my color. I protested, quietly, firmly. They didn't change their minds that day. But the next girl got in. That's how these things work, inch by inch." Malik nodded slowly. Her words sank deep. "I just wanted to get to Zurich," he said. "I know," she replied. "And you still will. But you did more than travel today." Malik felt something shift in his chest. Not release, exactly, but understanding. He smiled faintly. "What's your name?" "Evelyn Brooks," she said. "Retired principal. Lifelong troublemaker." They both chuckled. The sound broke some of the tension, softened the air. From 2 rows back, a soft voice called out, "Excuse me." They both turned. Theo Hernandez leaned forward, one hand in the air slightly, like a student asking to speak. "Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say I recorded what happened. I didn't plan to. I felt like people should see." Malik blinked. "You filmed it?" "Yeah. I caught most of it. I haven't posted it anywhere public yet. I figured you should know." Malik considered this. Part of him wanted to cringe. Another part wanted to thank the boy. But mostly, he wasn't sure how to feel. "I don't need to go viral," Malik said slowly. "I just want accountability." Theo nodded. "I get it. If you want me to delete it, I will. But if you don't, I think it could matter," Evelyn added. "Let him keep it. Stories like yours don't always get believed. Sometimes it takes evidence." Malik nodded. "All right, but don't post anything yet. Let's land first. Let me breathe." Theo smiled. "Of course. Whatever you say, sir." "Sir." Malik couldn't help but notice the way the word sat differently in Theo's mouth than it had in Pamela's. Respect, not suspicion. The hum of the plane filled the space again. More natural now. Softer. Some passengers were beginning to settle again. One woman even turned on a rom-com and pulled up her tray. Others, though, still watched Malik from the corners of their eyes, as if trying to decide what story they'd believe by the time they landed. Then came the announcement. "This is your captain speaking. We're currently cruising at 39,000 feet. We expect mild tailwinds through the night and a smooth arrival in Zurich at 10:15 local time. Thank you for choosing Sierra Skyways." Malik recognized the voice. calm, firm, unbothered. He wondered what the captain had really thought of everything that had transpired. He wondered how many times this had happened before, just not in front of the CEO. Jonah returned once more, this time with a linen napkin and a covered plate. "Compliments of Ms. Carter," he said. "She asked that you be served from the executive menu. She also asked if you prefer to be left alone the rest of the flight." Malik smiled slightly. "Tell her thank you, and yes, some quiet would be good." Jonah nodded and walked away. Malik lifted the cover from the plate. Grilled salmon, seasonal vegetables, jasmine rice. It smelled good, looked better than he expected, but still, he barely touched it. His appetite had gone missing somewhere over Nevada. Instead, he closed his eyes again and listened to the music in his head. Not jazz this time, just memory. The way his mother's hands moved when she braided his hair as a boy. The way his father's laugh filled a room when the music swelled. The way his own heart still beat steady, no matter how high the altitude or how loud the world questioned his place. He would get to Zurich. He would deliver his keynote. He would talk about cybersecurity, innovation, digital trust, but none of it would feel quite the same. Because sometimes, the most secure systems in the world couldn't stop the virus of doubt planted in people's hearts. But he was still here, still Malik, still flying, and that, for now, was enough. The plane floated in a cocoon of soft engine noise and darkness. Most passengers had settled into their seats with half-lidded eyes and flickering screens. Cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber glow. It was the hour of half-sleep when time slowed and everything felt suspended between sky and silence. But in 3A, Malik Rivers remained alert, not jittery or restless, just awake, his body still, his mind active. He was used to solitude at altitude. His job often took him across oceans to speak on digital sovereignty, on safeguarding identities in a world eager to steal them. Yet tonight, the irony of it all sat like a weight in his chest. For a man who built systems to keep the truth of a person secure, he had just spent the past 3 hours defending his own identity in the most analog way possible. Word by word, look by look. He reached down and pulled out his laptop. Not to work, but to give his hands a purpose. The screen lit up the seat in pale blue. He stared at the login prompt, then paused. Instead of typing, he closed the lid again. He wasn't ready. A quiet shuffle stirred the air beside him. Vivian Carter was standing in the aisle again. Her presence didn't command attention so much as demand consideration. Her eyes were sharp but not aggressive. Her posture formal, but not stiff. She looked like someone who had weathered storms before and knew how to walk straight through rain without flinching. "Malik," she said gently, "may I sit for a moment?" He nodded, gesturing toward the empty seat across the aisle. Vivian sat with a grace that came from practice, not performance. She rested her hands in her lap and waited a beat before speaking. "I didn't want to intrude again, but something came to my attention just now, and I think you deserve to hear it from me." Malik didn't speak. He waited. Vivian leaned slightly forward. One of our junior flight attendants overheard a conversation between Pamela and Jason. It was in the galley earlier, before I stepped in. Malik's gaze sharpened. "What kind of conversation?" Vivian didn't blink, Pamela said. And I quote, "He doesn't look like someone who'd buy that seat. Probably borrowed a friend's points or hacked the system." Malik inhaled slowly. The words didn't surprise him, but hearing them confirmed hurt in a new way. They solidified the suspicion that what he faced hadn't been a misunderstanding. It had been judgment, dressed up in company policy. Vivian continued. Jason didn't correct her. In fact, he laughed. He said, "Well, he's a smooth talker. Maybe he talked his way into it." She paused. "I'm telling you this not to reopen the wound, but because I want you to understand something." She looked him directly in the eye. "I am not going to let this slide. Not now. Not ever again." Malik studied her. "Why are you really telling me?" "Because you need to know you're not crazy," she said plainly. "You didn't imagine it. You didn't overreact. You didn't read into something that wasn't there. It was real. And it was wrong." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thank you," he said finally. They sat there in the soft light. Two people who had started this flight as strangers, now connected by something much heavier than turbulence. Vivian's voice softened even more. "When I took this job, I promised myself I would modernize more than just the fleet. I wanted to transform the culture. But it turns out that culture isn't about policies. It's about people. And sometimes the wrong people get comfortable doing the wrong things until someone forces a reckoning." Malik nodded, appreciating the clarity. "Reckonings are overdue," he said. Vivian smiled faintly. Then she pulled something from her jacket pocket, a card. It was matte black with the Sierra Skyways emblem embossed in silver. "This is my direct line," she said. "No assistance. No firewalls. If you ever feel something like this happens again, even at another gate, I want to hear about it." He took the card carefully, feeling the weight of it in his hand. Not the weight of privilege, the weight of accountability. He nodded once. "Thank you." She stood again, pausing. "I'll be giving a press statement after we land. A general one. I won't mention you by name unless you choose to speak first. That's your call." "Understood," Malik said. She turned and walked away, returning to 1A, leaving behind a stillness that felt like resolution. But it wasn't over. Not quite. As the night wore on, and the cabin grew quieter still, Malik finally drifted into sleep. It was a shallow sleep, the kind you fall into when you're not sure if it's okay to let your guard down. In a dream, he was back in college, sitting in a lecture hall. Everyone was staring. He looked down and realized he had no name tag, no ID, nothing to prove he belonged there. He turned to the professor, who stared back and said, "Is that your real name?" Malik woke with a jolt. The lights were still dim, the engine still humming, the world unchanged. But inside him, something stirred. He pulled out his journal from the seatback pocket, a habit he'd developed years ago on long-haul flights. 1 page for every journey, a quiet ritual of reflection. He opened to a blank page, took his pen. Date March 9th, Flight 317, San Diego to Zurich. Then he paused. A long pause. Finally, he wrote, "I did not expect tonight to remind me that flying is still a test for some of us. Not just of patience, but of place. I was asked to prove I belonged. Not with a barcode or a boarding pass, but with composure, with restraint, with unspoken dignity. And somehow, I passed. But I am tired of the test." He closed the journal, rested it on his tray, closed his eyes once more. Tomorrow he would walk into a conference hall and deliver a keynote to 400 tech executives about systems resilience. But tonight, he had lived its lesson firsthand. He wasn't just a technologist. He was living proof of what it meant to stay standing in a world that sometimes wanted you seated elsewhere. And in the row behind him, Evelyn Brooks smiled gently in her sleep, as if she already knew. The plane continued its slow glide over the Atlantic, suspended in a hushed calm that only came with crossing into international airspace. The hum of engines was steady, lulling some passengers into sleep while keeping others quietly alert. In the heart of that quiet, Malik Rivers sat with his arms crossed gently over his chest, eyes closed, not quite asleep. The cabin had returned to its expected order, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not peaceful, not quite. It was the kind of quiet that follows a confrontation when everyone pretends nothing happened, even though everyone knows it did. Pamela hadn't returned to the front cabin. No apologies, no acknowledgments, nothing but absence. Jason remained invisible, too. It was Jonah now who served water, checked on passengers, kept the rhythm of professionalism steady. His presence, quiet and consistent, helped reassemble the fractured sense of service. Malik noticed and appreciated it, but even order could feel hollow. Malik shifted slightly and opened his eyes. The cabin lights had been turned off completely now. Only the blue glow of emergency strips and the faint halo of reading lamps dotted the space. He reached down, retrieving his phone, opening the Notes app, and scrolling through old speech drafts. None of them felt relevant anymore. He was scheduled to speak at a cybersecurity conference in Zurich on the topic of systemic fortification through predictive AI. A sterile title for a sterile room. Tonight had changed that. He wouldn't just be talking about code, or breach prevention, or digital locks. He would talk about access, about how systems treated anomalies, about how implicit bias crept not just into software, but into policies, into procedures, into the people trained to enforce them. He would tell them that no firewall mattered if the human gatekeepers still judge value by appearance. A movement caught his eye. Evelyn Brooks was leaning forward again from 4B. "Couldn't sleep either," she whispered. Malik smiled softly and turned his seat slightly toward her. "Not really. My mind won't stop running laps." She chuckled, her voice raspy but kind. "The mind never sleeps after something shakes your foundation. That's not anxiety. That's awareness." She paused, then added, "I was a young teacher once, walking into classrooms where half the parents didn't trust me because of the color of my skin. Every lesson I taught felt like a test. Every mistake, a verdict. It wears on you." Malik leaned in, the connection forming again like a bridge in the dark. "Did you ever get used to it?" She shook her head slowly. "No, but I learned how to carry it without letting it crush me. There's power in surviving what others try to define you by." Malik exhaled slowly. Her words felt like both comfort and instruction. "You ever think it'll actually change?" Evelyn sat quietly for a moment. "I think change never announces itself. It arrives in whispers, in tiny rebellions, in the silence, after someone decides not to move when they're told to." She met his eyes. Tonight was one of those whispers. Malik leaned back, nodding gently. From behind them, a cough echoed. It was followed by hesitant footsteps. Jason Clark stood at the edge of the aisle, hands clasped in front of him. His posture was awkward, like a man summoned by guilt, but unsure what to do with it. "Mr. Rivers," he said softly, "may I speak with you?" Malik looked at him, expression unreadable. Evelyn remained still, watching quietly. Jason continued, I want to apologize. For earlier. For not speaking up when I should have. I followed Pamela's lead when I should have followed protocol. I've been going over it in my head for the last hour, and I just wanted to say I'm sorry." Malik studied him, letting the silence stretch. Then he asked calmly, "Why didn't you say something?" Then Jason shifted. "I was scared. Not of you. Of getting involved. of saying the wrong thing. And that's no excuse. I see that now. Malik's voice remained even. It's not just about what you didn't say. It's about what your silence allowed. You let her call me a liar without correction. You tried to move me to keep the peace. But peace for who? Jason nodded, shame clear in his face. You're right, all of it. I've been trained in conflict de-escalation, diversity response, all of it. But when it came time to act, I froze. And I see now that inaction is a decision. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just didn't want to leave this flight without at least trying to be accountable. Malik looked at him for a long time. Then he gave a short nod. Thank you for saying that. Most people wouldn't. Jason nodded back. His shoulders eased slightly. I hope you continue to speak, not just at that conference, but wherever you go. Malik said nothing more. Jason took that as his cue to leave and walked quietly back toward the crew area. Evelyn reached for her cup of tea and sipped it slowly. Sometimes the first step is just making them see it. Malik turned his eyes to the window again. The clouds below looked like a solid blanket, and above them, the stars hung weightless. A chime echoed overhead. The captain's voice returned. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about 2.5 hours from Zurich. Weather is clear. Cabin lights will remain dimmed. Please let your crew know if you need anything. Malik leaned back into his seat, finally allowing the tension in his shoulders to melt just a little. The hardest part wasn't over, but something important had shifted. He wasn't invisible anymore. And the people around him were starting to see, not just him, but what he represented. Systems were watching, passengers were learning, and silence was no longer safe for anyone who wanted to claim neutrality. He reached for his journal again, wrote, There's a moment between pressure and rupture, a point where the system either cracks or changes. I think tonight we hit that point, not with shouting, not with rage, but with refusal. And maybe that's how we move forward, one refusal at a time. Then he closed the journal and tucked it away. Somewhere beneath him, the Atlantic kept rolling. But above, Malik sat calm in his seat, not because everything had been resolved, but because he had stayed exactly where he belonged. The first light of morning brushed the edge of the horizon, barely visible through the small airplane window. A soft blue halo peeked through the clouds, like a promise. The long night was ending, and somewhere far below, Europe stirred. Malik Rivers rubbed his eyes, adjusting to the gradual return of light. He hadn't slept much, not deeply, not peacefully, but his mind was calmer now. The storm inside him no longer raging, but drifting like mist over calm water. The events of the night replayed in fragments. Pamela's icy stare, Jason's silence, Theo's recorded footage, and Vivian's quiet power. A sequence of moments, each one adding a layer to something bigger than a misunderstanding. It had become a reckoning, personal, but not only for him. Passengers were waking. Seatbacks adjusted, tray tables lifted. A murmur of voices started to flow through the cabin like morning birdsong. Evelyn Brooks was already sitting upright, her lips curved in a soft, knowing smile. You look different this morning, she said. Malik blinked at her, amused. Tired, no, she said. Lighter. He gave a quiet laugh. Maybe just resolved. I think I stopped needing them to understand. Now I just need them to see. Evelyn nodded, as if that was exactly the right answer. Jonah moved down the aisle, checking belts, collecting trash, offering warm towels. His movements were precise, but not robotic. Ah. He paused briefly at Malik's row, smiled, and handed him a folded napkin. Inside was a handwritten note. Sir, I wanted to say thank you. Watching how you carried yourself changed something for me. I won't forget. Jonah Malik read it twice. He folded it neatly and placed it inside his journal. Thank you, he said quietly. As Jonah moved on, the PA system clicked on. The captain's voice was smooth, almost cheerful now. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Zurich. Local time is 10:08 a.m. Temperature is a brisk 7 degrees Celsius. Please return your seats to the upright position and ensure your belts are fastened. The descent began. Malik felt the shift in gravity, not just in the plane, but in himself. He looked out the window again, and this time the clouds parted to reveal land. Hills, scattered homes, roads like threads weaving through countryside. It was a peaceful sight, nothing dramatic, just life continuing below. It struck him then. All this noise, all this conflict, all this fight to be seen, had occurred in a vessel designed to transport people quietly through the sky. A contradiction, a metaphor, a flying contradiction. As the cabin shifted into final landing mode, Vivian Carter stood up again from one row. She moved to Malik's row and crouched slightly, so she wasn't speaking down to him. We'll be landing in 10, she said. When we taxi in, security and media will be stationed near the VIP exit. Some of them caught wind of what happened through internal leaks. I'm not sure if it's made it online yet, but we'll know soon. Malik nodded. I understand. You still have full control, she added. You don't have to say a word. I can handle the press. You can walk away. He studied her face. You think it's better if I do? Vivian exhaled. I think it's your choice, but I also think your voice is clear, articulate, and earned. The world needs more examples like that. Malik tapped the journal resting on his lap. I wrote a few things. I'm not sure if they're for me or them yet. She smiled gently. Sometimes they're both. She returned to her seat as the plane dipped further. Malik felt the pressure shift again. This time not just altitude, anticipation. He closed his eyes one last time before landing, letting the final seconds of silence center him. This was not just an arrival. It was a threshold. The landing gear extended. A soft bump. The rumble of wheels meeting tarmac. Then the braking, smooth and controlled. The forward force tugging gently at his chest. The plane slowed. The sky disappeared as terminal walls filled the windows. They were here. Zurich. Jonah's voice came over the speaker now. On behalf of Sierra Skyways and your entire crew, welcome to Switzerland. Please remain seated until we've reached the gate and the captain has turned off the seatbelt sign. We thank you for flying with us. Malik unfastened his belt but stayed seated. Passengers stood. Bags were pulled from overhead bins. Coats fluffed. Voices returned in fuller volume now. But every few moments someone would glance at Malik, not with hostility, but with curiosity, with a kind of wary respect. Jason Clark stood by the exit door, stiff but composed. He didn't look at Malik, didn't speak. Pamela was nowhere in sight. Vivian waited at the front, arms gently folded. 2 suited men stood behind her near the door. Swiss airport staff. One held a clipboard, another held a walkie-talkie. Beyond the threshold, flashes of camera light shimmered faintly through the glass. Malik stood slowly. He retrieved his bag from the overhead compartment, not rushed, not hesitant. Theo Hernandez was behind him now, phone still in hand. You good, sir? He asked. Malik smiled slightly. I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Theo nodded. If you ever want that footage taken down, you just say the word. Malik looked him in the eye. Or maybe we let them see it. But with context. Theo smiled back. You write the context. I'll post it. They shook hands. Then Malik stepped forward, moving past the rows of first-class seats, past the curtain, and into the narrow walkway of the jet bridge where Vivian was waiting. They stood side by side for a moment before stepping through. Ready? She asked. He nodded. Let's walk. Together. They emerged into the light. The Zurich terminal was pristine. All clean lines, soft gray stone floors, and walls of glass that spilled in light like water. It was quiet in a way that airports rarely were. Orderly, polished, intentionally understated. But as Malik Rivers stepped into the VIP corridor flanked by Vivian Carter and two discreet airport security officers, the silence began to hum. The flickering of camera flashes started as a trickle, then grew more intense with each step toward the terminal doors. Behind the glass barrier, reporters and media techs waited with lenses raised and microphones thrust forward. Some pressed against the barrier. Some were already live. Malik paused for a moment. He could still turn left, take the private car to his hotel, skip the press entirely. He had no obligation to explain what had happened on Flight 317. No one had forced him to make a statement. But as he stood there, something deeper settled in his chest. That same quiet clarity he had felt when Pamela first doubted him, the moment he chose not to stand down. He turned to Vivian. Let's do it. Vivian nodded, then gestured to one of the Swiss officers, who opened the door. As the glass parted, noise burst through the quiet. Voices rose like a sudden storm. Mr. Rivers, is it true? You were asked to prove your ticket was real? Rivers, did you record what happened? Did the crew make racial comments? Are you planning legal action? The questions came all at once, but Malik didn't flinch. His face was calm, his expression neutral but not distant. He moved with quiet authority, the kind that needed no defense. Vivian lifted a hand, signaling the reporters to hold their questions. Malik will make a brief statement. No questions at this time. The crowd fell into a tense hush. Malik stepped forward. He took a breath, letting the silence stretch just long enough to hold their attention. My name is Malik Rivers. I am a cybersecurity architect, a father, a brother, and a son. Last night, I boarded Sierra Skyways Flight 317 from San Diego to Zurich in Seat 3A, a seat I paid for. He let his words settle before continuing. What should have been a routine flight became something else. I was questioned, not about protocol, not about safety, but about belonging. I was asked to prove that I deserved the seat I was already in. He looked directly at the row of cameras, not flinching. Let me be clear. This is not just about me. It is not just about a boarding pass or a cabin class. This is about the quiet expectations some people carry that black passengers must explain themselves, that we must shrink to avoid suspicion, that professionalism is not enough. He let that truth sit in the room like gravity. I was calm, I was respectful, but I did not yield, because this wasn't about being angry. It was about being seen. Vivian stepped beside him now, offering her presence as support without taking attention. Our airline has launched a full internal investigation, she said. Changes are already underway. We are not hiding behind policy. We are confronting culture, Malik added. I am not sharing this because I want to become a headline. I'm sharing it because this happens quietly to people every day. And most of them don't have cameras. They don't have press statements. They don't have CEOs beside them. He looked out again. They just have silence. And I believe silence is a form of consent. The reporters remained still, many visibly moved. One woman lowered her camera, her eyes wet. Vivian concluded, "We are making a commitment. Malik's experience will not disappear into a report. It will reshape the way our crews are trained and held accountable. This is not damage control. It's culture correction." Malik nodded. "I'm flying again next week. And the week after that. I won't stop flying. I won't stop speaking. And I won't stop expecting dignity." He stepped back. "Thank you." The security team ushered them through a side exit, away from the clamor. Malik felt the release of adrenaline as the door closed behind them. The quiet returned. Vivian looked over at him, something unreadable in her expression. That was the most powerful thing I've ever seen done without shouting. He smiled faintly. "I've been shouted at enough to know it rarely lands. But presence that stays." She gave a quiet laugh. "We're not done. Malik, after today, there are meetings, policies, terminations, apologies, and probably a lot of pushback. But the ground shifted just now. You felt it." He nodded. "Yes. But this isn't just about the airline. Vivian, this is about all the places we're still expected to ask permission to exist." She studied him for a beat, then nodded. "Then let's make sure we build something bigger than policy. Something permanent." They walked side by side to the private exit where a sleek black sedan waited. The driver opened the door, and Malik climbed in. Vivian paused at the edge. "You'll be safe at the hotel. My team is there. But if you change your mind about the conference..." Malik looked up at her. "I'm still going, but I might change my speech." She smiled. "Good. Sometimes truth doesn't need to be coded, just spoken." As the car pulled away, Malik leaned back against the seat, eyes closing for a moment. He wasn't tired, not anymore. He was awake, completely. The hall was vast and echoing with the quiet hum of anticipation. The Zurich International Conference Center had hosted hundreds of keynotes over the years, from world leaders to tech visionaries. But today, there was a noticeable tension in the air. Not fear, not excitement, something heavier, like people expected to witness something that would ripple beyond slides and applause. Malik Rivers stood in the wings, watching as the audience filled their seats row by row. The massive LED screen behind the podium displayed a bold title in white letters: "Systemic Fortification in a Fragmented World." The original title of his talk, he frowned at it. It no longer fit. That title had been written before Flight 317, before Pamela's challenge, before Jason's silence, before Vivian's intervention, before Evelyn's wisdom and Theo's camera. A new title was needed. He pulled out his phone and typed it into the shared file with the conference tech team. 2 minutes later, the LED screen flickered and refreshed. Now it read, "Access denied. What systems forget about people." Malik let out a slow breath. Vivian Carter was in the second row. She had shown up unannounced, alone, in a simple blazer and jeans. No entourage, no press. Just her eyes locked on the stage, giving her quiet support. Behind her sat Evelyn Brooks. She had made the effort to come too, having flown to Zurich on a later flight. Her scarf was bright coral today, a sharp contrast to the corporate grays around her. She looked like a candle in a sea of steel. Malik was introduced. "Please welcome to the stage, Mr. Malik Rivers, Principal Architect of Cipher Trace Technologies, and one of the most respected voices in ethical AI and data sovereignty. Polite applause followed, professional, reserved. They did not know what they were about to receive. Malik walked calmly to the podium. No notes in his hand, no teleprompter. He began. Good morning. I was supposed to speak today about predictive systems and digital resilience, about how we can use algorithms to forecast risks and build smarter defense networks. He paused, letting the crowd settle. But something happened to me less than 48 hours ago that made me realize we can build the smartest systems in the world and still fail the most basic human tests. He held their eyes. I boarded a plane in San Diego, first class, seat 3A. I had paid for that seat. I had my boarding pass, my ID, my frequent flyer number, everything. And yet I was asked quietly, forcefully, to prove I belonged there. A few people in the crowd shifted in their seats. Now some of you might think, that sounds like a mistake, a procedural hiccup, a random check. That is the problem. These things are never random. They are trained. They are tolerated. They are built into the culture of institutions that never stop to audit their own bias. He walked away from the podium now, wireless mic in hand. In my line of work, we talk about gatekeeping systems, about preventing unauthorized access. But what happens when the system misidentifies the authorized person? What happens when the system doesn't fail? Technically, but morally. That was what happened on Flight 317. He paused again. A flight attendant saw my skin before she saw my boarding pass. She saw my calm demeanor and interpreted it as suspicious. She saw a black man in a first-class seat and decided it needed verifying. And the worst part, she was not alone. Her colleagues didn't stop her. They enabled it. They watched. They excused it. He looked toward the audience, letting each word land. That's how systems fail. Not with malfunctions, but with permission. The room was dead silent now. I was lucky. I had people who spoke up. A young man recorded it. An executive intervened. I had visibility. But millions of people experience this kind of judgment quietly. In airports, in hospitals, in classrooms, in hiring processes. They don't have footage. They don't have microphones. And they carry it with them like an invisible bruise. He moved back to center stage. So today, I'm not asking you to improve your code. I'm asking you to examine your culture. Because the best encryption in the world cannot protect someone from a system that was never designed to see them in the first place. There were no slides, no charts, just silence and attention. Malik continued. After that flight, I realized something else. I realized I had stopped expecting better. I had grown so used to being the exception, so used to adjusting my tone, my posture, my clothes to make people comfortable, that I stopped noticing the toll it took. He inhaled deeply. That's the part they never measure. The emotional bandwidth it takes to prove your humanity. He stepped away again. I'm not angry. I'm not broken. But I am done being quiet. Because systems don't correct themselves. People do. He turned to the crowd. One last time. If you lead teams, ask yourselves what behavior you are quietly permitting. If you write policies, ask who those policies protect and who they burden. If you build technologies, ask if they reflect the lived realities of the people who will use them. He lowered the mic slightly. And if you fly first class, and you see someone being questioned for their right to sit beside you, ask why you're silent. A long pause. Thank you. At first, there was silence. Then one clap. Then another. Then a wave of sound broke across the room. Not polite, not reserved. A standing ovation. Vivian stood first, Evelyn next. The entire room followed. Malik didn't bow. He just nodded, quietly, respectfully. He had not come to perform. He had come to testify, and they had listened. The conference had ended, but the ripples were far from quiet. Malik Rivers sat alone in the hotel lounge, the soft glow of a laptop illuminating his face. Outside, Zurich was settling into evening, its streets alive with quiet chatter and distant music. But inside, Malik's world was consumed by the digital storm his story had ignited. Notifications flooded his phone relentlessly. Messages from friends, strangers, colleagues, and strangers turned allies poured in with support, questions, and requests for interviews. Malik scrolled through them, each ping a reminder that his personal ordeal had become a collective call for change. His email inbox showed dozens of subject lines marked urgent, media request, collaboration opportunity, and invitation. He had barely had time to respond, and his thoughts were a whirlwind. He leaned back, fingers tracing the edges of the Sierra Skyways card Vivian had given him. It was more than a token. It was a promise, a responsibility, an invitation to be part of something greater. He opened a new document and started typing. Access denied is not just a story about one flight. It's a symptom of systemic failure. Systems are only as unbiased as the people who build and enforce them. The words poured out, not as a prepared statement, but as a raw reflection of his experience and vision. As he typed, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Robert Grant, a venture capitalist he had met months before, who had always encouraged him to think bigger. Robert had seen Malik's keynote online and sent a simple line, "Let's talk. There's momentum here." Malik smiled faintly and quickly typed back, "Tomorrow morning. Let's make it count." He closed his laptop and looked out the window. The sky was a deep indigo, stars beginning to pierce the dark veil. He thought of Theo Hernandez, the young student whose quiet courage had helped bring this story into the light. His mind wandered to Evelyn Brooks and Vivian Carter, the unlikely allies who had stood beside him. The scene was surreal. Just days ago, he had been fighting for his dignity in an airport gate. Now he was at the center of a movement, but with the flood of attention came an undercurrent of backlash. Social media was a battleground. Some hailed him as a hero, a voice of dignity and resilience. Others dismissed him as an opportunist, a troublemaker, or worse. The polarized narratives echoed old wounds and new divisions. Malik knew the truth was more complex. He thought about the flight attendants he had confronted, Pamela Walsh and Jason Clark. Their faces flickered in his mind, not as villains, but as symptoms of a system that had failed them as much as it had failed him. Could people change? Did institutions truly want to evolve, or were they only responding to pressure? He pressed his hands together and closed his eyes. Change was never linear. It was messy. It was uncomfortable. It demanded patience and persistence. The next morning arrived with sharp clarity. Malik was already awake, reviewing notes for his meeting with Robert Grant. They were set to discuss forming an advisory board for Sierra Skyways' new inclusivity initiative, a project born directly from Malik's experience. The plan was ambitious, not just a training module, not just a PR campaign, a structural overhaul, new hiring practices, zero-tolerance policies, immersive bias training using real scenarios, the integration of AI tools designed to flag and prevent discriminatory behavior before it occurred. Robert believed in Malik's vision. He saw it as a pivot point, not just for Sierra Skyways, but for the entire industry. Their meeting was intense but hopeful. They spoke for hours, brainstorming ways to harness the power of narrative, technology, and leadership to create lasting impact. Malik felt a surge of purpose, but beneath the optimism, he kept returning to a quiet truth. This was just the beginning. Back at the airport, life carried on. Flights came and went. Passengers moved through terminals unaware of the movement sparked by one man's refusal to be invisible. And yet, the echoes of that refusal spread. Conversations started behind closed doors. Policies were questioned. Faces once hidden began to be seen. Malik closed his laptop after sending the draft of an open letter to the Sierra Skyways board. It was a plea for transparency and courage, for a future where dignity was not a privilege, but a right. As he packed his bags to leave Zurich, Malik felt something shift inside him. The exhaustion of the past days was real, but so was the fire. He was no longer just fighting for a seat on a plane. He was fighting for the seat everyone deserved. Malik Rivers stood at the entrance of Sierra Skyways headquarters, a towering glass building reflecting the morning sun like a prism. The city around him buzzed with life-honking cars, early commuters, and the distant sound of a street musician tuning his guitar. But inside these walls, a new chapter was beginning. He adjusted the lapel of his jacket and stepped forward. The lobby was sleek and minimalist, polished floors, modern art on the walls, and the quiet murmur of professional voices. Malik's footsteps echoed as he walked toward the executive elevators. Each step felt weighted with meaning. This was not just a building. It was a symbol of change. The elevator rose smoothly to the 12th floor, the newly established Office of Inclusivity and Customer Experience. The doors opened to a bright space filled with desks, whiteboards covered in notes, and a small team of diverse faces bustling with energy. Vivian Carter greeted him at the door, her smile warm but serious. "Welcome back, Malik." "Thank you, Vivian. It's good to be here." They walked together to a conference room overlooking the city skyline. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and purpose. "This is where it begins," Vivian said. "The place where policy meets action, where culture is more than a buzzword." Malik nodded. "I've reviewed the training modules, the proposed AI tools, and the accountability frameworks. They're a good start. But culture is about people. It's about trust. It's about listening even when it's uncomfortable." Vivian agreed. "Exactly. And that's why we want you to lead a series of workshops, not just for employees, but for executives and leadership too." Malik considered this. That's a big task, but necessary. They sat down and began to outline the roadmap. Months of planning, community engagement, and iterative training. The conversation shifted to real stories, the moments that break systems open. Malik shared his experience on Flight 317 not as an isolated incident, but as a thread in a larger tapestry of systemic bias. The team listened, took notes, asked questions. It was clear this was more than corporate obligation. It was a mission. Later that day, Malik found himself in a quiet corner with Evelyn Brooks. She had accompanied him to the office, her presence a steadying force. "It feels different now," Malik said. "Like the weight is still there, but it's shared." Evelyn smiled. "That's progress. It never disappears. You just build the muscle to carry it with others." Malik looked out the window. The city stretched endlessly. So many stories, so many battles fought quietly. He thought about the passengers on Flight 317, the businessman who had defended him, the young student who recorded, the crew who faltered. Change wasn't just about firing individuals. It was about transforming systems so those individuals had no room to perpetuate harm. As the weeks turned into months, the Office of Inclusivity launched new initiatives. Real case studies were used in training. New technology flagged incidents in real time. Feedback loops were established so passengers could report experiences directly. The airline began to change. Slowly. Visibly. One afternoon, Malik received a message from Theo Hernandez. There's a family at JFK facing a language barrier and seat confusion. The young agent there is using a new translation app. They're calm, smiling. It feels different. Malik smiled. That's the ripple effect. He thought about his journey from the gate at San Diego to the boardroom in Zurich, from silent humiliation to empowered advocate. He realized the truth he had always known. A seat on a plane is more than a place to sit. It's a seat at the table, a seat where dignity is demanded and respected, and a seat that must be earned not by proving you belong, but by simply being. Malik closed his eyes briefly, breathed deeply, and opened them with quiet resolve. This was just the beginning. Malik Rivers' story is a stark reminder that discrimination can happen anywhere, even 30,000 feet above the ground. Yet, it also shows us the strength that comes from standing firm in truth and demanding respect. His quiet courage sparked a reckoning that shook an entire airline, forcing a conversation about systemic bias, accountability, and the power of empathy. We must never accept that anyone should be made to prove their worthiness, to simply exist in a space that belongs to them. This story honors those who face invisible battles daily and calls on all of us to listen, act, and demand change. If this story moved you, if it awakened something in your heart, then please like this video, share it widely, and subscribe to our channel for more real stories that shine a light on injustice and resilience. Together, we can keep this conversation alive and create a world where dignity is not optional but guaranteed. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.